morning, or depending when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name is Ross, and I was always told I had a voice radio, so today I'm going to be showing you another fun new dragon Pokemon from Japan's Dragonstorm expansion. We're talking about Kyurem. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. And as always, our translation comes from the lovely David Hochmann over at LimitlessTCG.com. And it is a dragon-type Kyurem, which straight off the bat, a little bit sad. Because you're not hitting anything for weakness, and that always makes me a little bit upset. I like being able to hit for weakness, and Kyurem's one of those. It would be a water Pokemon if it wasn't a dragon. And you know what? I don't mind hitting for water weakness. That could be fun. Now, the other thing is, of course, that dragon Pokemon do have a lot of options at the moment. They do have Devoured Field. That means they get to do an extra 10 damage, which is nice. They do have Altaria, meaning they can do an extra 20 damage for each Altaria, which is nice. They have Zinnia to accelerate energy if you've had a Pokemon KO'd, and Lance Prism Star to get Pokemon out of your deck if you've just had a Pokemon KO'd. Although, to be fair, Lance really does thrive when it is getting an evolved Pokemon, a Stage 1 or Stage 2, from your deck directly onto your bench, so it's not really something I can recommend wholeheartedly using with Kyurem, but it's something to bear in mind. 130 HP is about right, but it's also very, very important. There's a whole bunch of Pokemon out here like Golisopod, for instance, like Silvally, and of course, like Zoroark GX, that really do thrive in the current meta, but only hit for 120. This will mean you survive with 10 HP remaining, which when we get to the Outrage attack, you will see, if you haven't already, that this is about the best thing possible. Retreat cost of 2 is the worst one in the game, and a weakness to Fairy is a little bit of a pain with Gardevoir running around, but it does mean that Dedenne, that does 60 damage if they've got a lightning Pokemon on the bench, will again be hitting 120 and not quite getting a KO. And I know I mentioned Dedenne in a lot of these videos with dragon Pokemon at the moment, but Dedenne really is going to be our go-to colourless energy fairy Pokemon, just to hit for weakness, so it does need to be mentioned here and there. So the first attack, as I've already intimated, is Outrage. 20 damage plus 10 more for each damage counter on this Pokemon for 2 colourless energy. Now the good news here is you can just use double colourless energy, so it is basically a single attachment, and that's pretty gosh darn nice. But this is another one of those great Pokemon where your opponent basically has to get a one-hit KO, or else they're going to be fearing retaliation. We saw this with Tauros GX, although that did fall out of favour quite quickly. We've seen this with Alolan Ninetales, and although this doesn't do quite as much damage, the numbers work very nicely. So let's take one of those aforementioned Pokemon like Zoroark that will hit for 120. Now maybe they've got a Devoured Field, and whatever you do, if you're playing against Zoroark, don't put Devoured Field in play. That would be terrible. And maybe they use a Professor Kukui, but if they don't, then they're hitting for 120. Which means that you will then be using Outrage for 140 damage for just a double colourless energy. Then you add yourself a Choice Band onto here, and you're doing 170, and Tapu Lele is going down. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. You can stick a Tapu Lele in the active, maybe using something like a Pokemon Catcher or a Guzma, and then you just get to take 2 prizes straight away from a Pokemon that's a basic, attaching for 1 energy that will give up 1 prize. Now, don't get me wrong, a good player is not going to fall into this trap. A good player, seeing that active when it's got a Tapu Lele on the bench, is not going to hit you for 120. What they'll probably do is use something like a Tapu Koko, do 20 damage to all of your Pokemon, and then finish you off. But that's okay. Even if you're not being able to hit for 170 for a double colourless energy, your opponent is basically taking a turn where they're not attacking, which means you get an extra turn to attach energy, an extra turn to evolve up, an extra turn to get some damage on the field, where your opponent really isn't doing very much at all. And we like this. Best case scenario, your opponent does a fairly large attack and you get to outrage for lots of damage. Like I've said, good players are unlikely to fall into this trap. But worst case scenario, your opponent has to use a Guzma that they don't want to, in which case they've used a Guzma. You can still put Kyurem in the active, they ain't going to have a Guzma every turn, unless they're just drawing brilliantly and playing a Zoroark deck, playing Puzzle of Time, in which case I suppose they might actually have 6 Guzma in a game. But it's very unlikely. Or they're having to use some little attack they don't want to use so that they can soften you up to get a KO with the attack they would rather be using. And if your opponent is softening you up, trying to set up an attack in future turns, not getting a KO when they want to, not doing the attack they want to, having to give you an extra turn, all of these are really good things. And this is what Kyurem does. Now, we used to have a Kyurem that had this Outrage attack. It was great. I am proud to say, I once top cut a tournament playing Quad Kyurem. Although I should qualify this by saying, I have never in my tournament life had a better run of matches. I basically had like 4 games in a row that were insanely favourable, ended up 4-0 in a 5-round tournament, so I had to top cut. But even so, I have fond memories of this Kyurem because I once played Quad Kyurem. The thing is, that one hit for weakness, and the Reshiram from Shining Legends with this attack hits for weakness, and the Zekrom from Shining Legends with this attack hits for weakness. So I've said a lot of good, useful things about this attack, and they're all true. But oh my goodness, I wish it hit for weakness. Second attack here, 2 water energy, 1 colorless energy, 100 damage, 20 damage to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon. It's fine, but it's not terribly all-inspiring. Now, I should mention counter energy can be used here. So it's kind of 2 energy attachments, but even that is not something you're really going to want to be relying on because counter energy really works best when you're dropping it on something like a Cobalion, and then boom, you're attacking right away. You don't really want to have an energy and a counter energy, because that really is too many resources than you really want to be using. And 100 damage would be fine if you were hitting for weakness. Getting a 1-hit KO on a Volcanion EX while doing 20 damage to the bench? Yes. But there's very little that has 100 or less HP except for evolving basics and stage 1s. So you're unlikely to be getting a KO with this attack. The 20 damage to the bench is nice, but it's not really a reason to use this. Now, the old Kyurem from Noble Victories, for the same attack cost, did 30 damage to each of your opponent's Pokemon. Think of it like a super-powered flying flip. And, of course, you could hit for weakness on the active if they were weak to water. But nothing's weak to dragon. I find this second attack, I think the polite way to put it, is underwhelming. It's not a bad attack per se, but if you're putting 2 water and 1 other energy down onto a Pokemon, generally speaking, we're going to have better options. We looked at Gyarados earlier. That's a better option. Alolan Ninetales I mentioned earlier in this video. That's a better option. And I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, but Noble Victories was released in November 2011, somewhere around 7 years ago. And you've got the same HP, the same Outrage attack, literally the same, a worse typing, and a worse second attack. So come on, how has Kyurem gotten worse in the past 7 years? That is a little bit offensive to me. I don't think this new Kyurem is bad, and I like having an Outrager. But Reshiram's a better Outrager, and Zekrom is a better Outrager. Although I suppose if you're using water energy in your deck, then at least you can use a second attack with Zekrom, as underwhelming as it might be. I'm giving Zekrom between 2 and 3 Wassies. I don't necessarily think it's a bad card, but the Drampa we looked at the other day is a better starting Pokemon in most Dragon decks. And Reshiram and Zekrom are better Outrage Pokemon. And this is just worse than it was 7 years ago, when this pretty much same Kyurem was released in Noble Victories, and that scares me away from giving it a higher score. But if you think it's better than I've given it credit for, then come at me, bro, in the comment section. Go nuts, but remember the rule. Be nice. Make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at TheWossy, and Twitch for some live action at twitch.tv/PTCGRadio. If you want to support the channel, get some bonus podcasts, etc., then head on over to patreon.com/PTCGRadio. And do check out Wossy Plays, my other channel. There's fun stuff. I think you'll like it. But by far the most important thing, as always, is to look after yourselves. Until next time. Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.